Hi, my name is Evil and, well, that's not my real name. Of course, it's a nickname. My real name is Dave. Why Evil? I've heard you won't ask. Well, in my early 20s, I was nicknamed Eagle. I'd love to say it was because of my piercing eyes, high flight, and determination to mate for life, but I'd kid you not. If you insist on knowing all the details, my nose is slightly crooked. A legacy of a turbulent youth. I could live with the name, so I was happy. After all, my best friend's nickname was Scrotus. No, Eagle was fine. Then, when I was 25, my sweet niece came up to me at a family party and asked me in a cute, girly whisper why I was named Evil. One question, one damn question, and I would have to spend the rest of my life explaining myself. I married Lisa 10 years ago after a fairly long courtship. I wanted to be sure, and I wanted her to be sure. We Eagles do mate for life, and I would never willingly end my marriage. I believe in what my parents' generation believed in. You make a conscious decision and then live with the consequences of that decision. I loved my wife, and as of the beginning and end of this story, I believe she loves me. Beyond that belief, I considered myself a modern man. I don't fit the old style. Man talks, woman does. In my world, men and women can be equal. The fairy tale of 2.4 children and grandchildren was not for us. After 3 years of unsuccessful attempts, we decided to check me out. Far from it how inconvenient it was. Then we checked Lisa. Malformed ovaries. We optimistically asked the doctor if this meant she would have trouble conceiving. He replied that no, she would never be able to get pregnant. I pretended that this was okay, as I could see that Lisa was devastated. I told her that I was fine with that. I could be happy just loving her for the rest of my life. Lying is acceptable when you love someone and are married for life. Besides, modern couples tend to be childless. I still loved her when her changed attitude cost her her customer service rep position, and she didn't feel confident enough to look for another. Or when her decreased activity level caused her to put on a little weight. When she stopped dressing nicely or wearing makeup, I still loved her. Eagles mate for life and don't let temporary mood swings kick their mate out of the nest. Modern men step up and try their best. This angry eagle spared no compliments, bought his companion flowers and gifts, and took her on vacation twice a year, even though he himself was trying to grow his budding electrical contracting business and could not afford such a vacation. This eagle's inner anxieties should have been triggered when our circle of friends began to fade. But this did not happen, for the fading process was very slow and imperceptible. As the couples in our friendship circle fulfilled their social duty and had children, they gradually faded away as friends. It was only later that I realized that once they had a child, Lisa gradually distanced herself from them. Since she controlled our social calendar, I was unaware of these entanglements. One of the triggers for my further actions was the realization that while I was the primary breadwinner, I had also become the primary entertainer. The modern man took it all calmly. I noticed that the nest environment was slowly changing. When Lisa first finished work, she became enthusiastic about the house, cooking, and our garden. Our house went from well-maintained to immaculate. Our garden became the object of everyone's admiration. It was clearly loved and nurtured. At least twice a week I came home and strange exotic smells wafted from the kitchen. Life was good. Except for our love life. Pretty much from the day she received the dreaded diagnosis, our sex life began to slip from 5+ sessions a week to, well, I'm a little ashamed to admit, 1+. Again, this decline was gradual and not immediately noticeable. In retrospect, I suppose that with such a close connection between sex and procreation now off the table, it was inevitable that sex should have become psychologically uncomfortable. Modern man agreed that the legal change away from allowing men to insist on their conjugal rights was right and necessary. Therefore, modern man had no choice but to suffer in silent disappointment. I just went back and reread the first page and a half of this diary and realized that I may have misrepresented Lisa somewhat. I don't want you to get the impression that she was perfect because that's not true. She does have some flaws. But loving partners accept them and don't notice them, don't they? Probably the thing that annoyed me the most was her, well, I can't even think of what to call it. When it came to shared responsibilities, she would increase her efforts about 5 times, but decrease my efforts by at least half. As a result, to get her to recognize that I was doing an equal share of the work, I had to do about 10 times as much as she did. Even so, things were on a roll. This could have been a source of contention in our marriage, but I'm an enlightened 21st century guy. I never expected my life partner to be perfect. This fairy tale nonsense is so last century. I suppose the major revision of my life began on Thursday afternoon. To lighten the load on Lisa, I took up grocery shopping. I did my major shopping on Thursdays on my way home. I met one of our former close friends who invited us over for a barbecue the next night. I didn't mind, so upon returning to the nest, I relayed the offer to my buddy. She immediately stated that since tomorrow was Friday, she was going to her weekly meditation and didn't think it was appropriate for a married man to go to a social evening alone. Oh, I forgot to mention the weekly meditation, did I? How unkind of me to forget Lisa's weekly foray out of the nest. Like many people who are no longer sure of their life's purpose, Lisa was searching for a higher meaning. In the old days, that void was filled by a god. The modern woman I married couldn't bring herself to follow that old path and joined a group I called Ancient Wisdom Recyclers. Every Friday, she and a group of other lost souls would meet and meditate. They read each other's auras, invoked healing energies, and other crap that I, as a modern person, tried not to talk about. I was never encouraged or asked to participate. I wouldn't have fit in, would I? I've never met any of her fellow meditators socially, but have observed them on the rare occasions I've been asked to pick Lisa up after class. I think it's called Aquarian woman, even the 20% of them that have penises. The men were soft, long-haired effeminate, the kind that even makes modern man's palms itch. Women in previous generations would have been called hippies. Again, long hair, usually unkept, soft smiles, and freely jiggling breasts. Uninhibited by the 20th century symbols of male supremacy, bras. Although it was never proven, my imagination pictured lush armpit vegetation. In my opinion, Lisa never fit into that group. With her smooth armpits and love of materialism, how could she? None of the men seemed to be related to any of the women, and I was the only one picking up a spouse. Then I looked at the faces of Lisa's fellow astral travelers and stopped wondering. Not to sound ungrateful, but most of them had faces less attractive than my own armpits. Lisa plumbed the depths of my contemporaneity by telling me about Jenny's aura that night, or who was the recipient of healing energy that night. The modern man is ashamed to admit that he passed out. More often than not, he went to bed alone, while the modern woman meditated until it was time for the modern man's 8-hour nap. That's how I found myself alone on a Friday night, looking around an unkept house with untidy bags of takeout food from Wednesday. A house situated on a property that increasingly resembled deep Amazon. In my brain, a lever switched from off to on. Web-filled neural pathways opened up. A conclusion was reached. Within the current understanding of the human condition, how could I get Lisa back on the rails? I had long suspected that the depression was caused by Lisa's deep realization that evolutionarily speaking, she had no purpose. That could have depressed anyone. It certainly depressed me. I guess that's where this story begins. The next day, I began a campaign to convince my friend that she should seek treatment for depression. The campaign started badly, somewhere around the -100 mark, when Lisa began to deny having the disorder. Cursing himself, this modern man did what he should have done from the start. He researched the issue. And guess what? Most people who suffer from depression don't realize they have it. Thus began a campaign of enlightenment. To be honest with myself, the results were overwhelming. Lisa steadfastly refused to consult unenlightened psychiatrists or even psychologists. Ancient Easterners didn't believe in such things, and being a hippie was definitely not a disorder. Modern man was even accused of being a caveman for not believing that healing energy could be summoned and sent to some sufferer with an ingrown toenail through the astral plane. After months of effort, the best I was able to achieve was Lisa's pliant agreement to seek the help of her group's guru to find an alternative counselor. This took another 2 weeks, and I was informed that the person in question was a lady named Thunderchild. Not a great start, but better than nothing. Counseling sessions were held on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. I wish I could describe Thunderchild, but at the time of writing, I have never had the pleasure of meeting her. I was assured that she spoke professionally and the initial signs were good. After the first week, Lisa announced that the main problem seemed to be that she had no purpose in life. Thunderchild must have used a different form of this advice than what I have found in recent months. I was pleasantly surprised when Lisa's new life goal of charitable volunteering on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays caused a partial recovery. There was a decrease in self-absorption. Although I had to impress upon her that since her counseling sessions were from 3 to 3 p.m., she still had time to cook before then, so take-home snacks 5 times a week were not a necessity. This applied to housework as well. Gone was the lethargic Lisa. Back came a wife who took care of her appearance and showed a new lust for life. Even more pleasant was the end of autocracy. Depressed, Lisa stopped making decisions, leaving me to fill the gap. That was over with, and democracy was back. To the point where Lisa started making unilateral decisions that rightfully should have been joint decisions. However, not all was rosy. My suggestion that instead of volunteering 3 days a week, she could help me with the business was firmly rejected. She stated that she had to follow her counselor's instructions thoroughly, and apparently sacrifice without personal gain was critical. No hints made her cook on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, so the modern man took up the first 2 of these. So did he himself, taking on gardening chores. Amazon was deforested, but in a good way. Perhaps the most significant indicator of profound change has been the revitalized sex life of the modern couple. Gone is the habit of having sex once a week. They have been replaced by regular Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday nights. I, a caveman, did not complain about the lack of spontaneity in my gratitude. All attempts at Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday were discarded in favor of solitary, late-night solitary meditation. Apparently, daytime meditations were ineffective due to solar interference. In fact, if it were not for one small thing, life would be tolerable. Being happy about the increased frequency of intimate contacts, the modern man did not notice a decrease in quality for the first month. More and more often disappeared trembling response to my ardor. She was replaced, increasingly frankly, by the Aquarius woman, who more and more convincingly resembled a corpse. The ever-vigilant, not-so-modern man once diplomatically raised the issue, just to make sure she enjoyed it as much as she did. In retrospect, it was a carefully considered response. I was happy when this conversation sparked a more active response in the bedroom. I was unhappy that this response only lasted a week. A sensitive New Age man began to dread the thrice-weekly ritual, and one Thursday evening made excuses for breaking the new tradition. He was stunned by the aggression in response to his attempt to avoid his duty. He was, pardon my French, utterly confused. I was increasingly disturbed by more and more evidence of Lisa's apparent dependence on her counselor, Miss Thunderchild. She spoke this way and that, dominating many conversations. Under the pretense of wanting to thank Sage, I asked if I could have an audience with her. After consultation, an audience was refused. Discouraged, I stooped to waiting surreptitiously outside the meditation site on Friday evening. It is not known if Miss Thunderchild was among those who went out on those evenings. The only person who stood out among the outcasts of the 60s who left these evenings was the lady who was locking herself in. She was almost as wide as she was tall, and if she challenged me to an arm wrestle, I would probably claim I had a sore shoulder. So it could be said that the modern man was happier. The modern woman was returning to normal life, and except for some strange behavior, everything was acceptable. It got to the point that I came home one Thursday afternoon, but I didn't see the smells of dinner cooking. I saw Lisa sitting next to 2 packed suitcases. More than embarrassed and concerned, I took the proffered seat across from her at the kitchen table for a little interrogation. About me. Did I love her? Yes, I did. Did I think she loved me more than anyone else on this planet? Again, yes. Did I feel that her counselor knew what she was talking about? Yes, overall I believe that her counseling had a positive effect. Would I agree with her counselor's advice to go away for a few weeks to find myself? No, I wouldn't. Did I think I owned it? No, definitely not. At that moment, the growing aggression was interrupted by the arrival of a text message on Lisa's cell phone. A modern woman always interrupts a face-to-face conversation to respond to a text message. Struggling to remain modern, the man snatched the cell phone and shoved it into his pocket. Lisa objected, but resigned herself to the futility of a physical response. The modern man was much larger than the modern woman who resorted to words. If I recognize that she loves me, and I love her and she doesn't belong to me, why would I ignore wise counsel and let her find herself? The modern man refuses to accept any mission of self-discovery by his wife until he is informed of the purpose and scope of such a mission. For example, whether other men or even women can participate sexually in such an exploration. Black and white responses were set aside while the wording was scrutinized. Words and phrases such as caveman, outdated heterosexual society, and polygamy were less carefully considered. Taking a pause to mentally summarize the facts, he believed her when she said she loved him, but extramarital sex was not ruled out in any absence from the family home. The modern man appealed to his inner caveman. He reaffirmed his commitment never to voluntarily break their union, but her leaving to find herself without a credible promise of fidelity would be prima facie evidence that she was breaking their pact. I blacked out when it became clear that no such promise would follow. I caught only the repetition of caveman and the frequent thunderchild said. Using this time to think, I devised a plan of action that was definitely not appropriate for a modern man. I reached into her purse, pulled out her car keys, all her cash and cards, and then went back to remove her rings. Taking them off was easy since I knew she did it every Friday night. Free-spirited hippies didn't wear bras or wedding rings. Lisa pounced on me. She said I was the one who insisted she needed therapy, and now she was following the advice of her therapist, and I had no right to object. I responded by pointing out that the right to object is my most basic democratic right, as is my basic demand for monogamy in marriage. She, as a modern woman, might well walk out of the gate and into the arms of another man or woman. I really couldn't decide which one. But she would be doing so as someone I no longer consider a wife, and certainly not under my care. A little taken aback by my sudden intransigence, Lisa resorted to her original plan for the evening. She picked up 2 bags and the rest of her purse and walked out the front door. I followed her, mentally concluding that with no money or ability to hail a cab, Lisa was either acting on autopilot or someone was waiting for her outside. I joined her on the porch and searched until I saw a car across the street with its headlights on. I rushed toward it but saw it speed away with a roar. The eagle has sharp eyes and he memorized the license plate number. A very infuriated modern woman followed me into the house. The tirade I launched into was clearly unmodern and included several swear words common since medieval times. At the center of the tirade was again the contradiction between me wanting her to get well, but not allowing her to follow the counselor's advice. Midstream, I went to bed, only to be told that she wasn't going to share a bed with a caveman. I agreed that she shouldn't do that and threw a few armfuls of her stuff into the spare room. That night, the eagle slept very poorly in its shelter. I still can't figure out if there was an apology from Lisa the next morning. She assured me of her love and told me that she had obviously misjudged my commitment to her future happiness. For the sake of our 10-year marriage and the fact that she loved me deeply, she was going to seek emergency counseling by the following Tuesday to see if there were alternatives to separation. She asked me if I could stick to the original plan if no alternatives were acceptable. The answer was no. In the spirit of détente, I did return the property to her. We parted on the terms of an uneasy truce. That evening, after cooking dinner, I drove to her meditation site. Noticing that her car was there, I sat down to wait. If there was a third person in our relationship, it was either meeting here or at her charity events. While I waited, I contacted a few dubious friends to see if I could get a name and address from the license plate number. Hopes were high. An hour after everyone but Lisa and the broad lady had left, I headed home, unable to keep my eyes open. The next day I was awakened in the way that all men like to be awakened, unless of course they are in prison. It was reminiscent of the days of our courtship. I remembered to control my impulses and warn her before taking a money shot. An Aquarius woman doesn't do that. Afterward, she tried to kiss me. Even the modern man doesn't do that. There were many apologies that morning, both from Lisa and through Lisa from Thunderchild. Apologies for both of them underestimating my desire, nay, demand for monogamy. Lisa confirmed that emergency counseling had already begun, and I would be kept in the loop. She was alarmed that I might think as if she would ever start a relationship with another man without my knowledge or consent. Almost certain that everything was going my way, I let my guard down. During the next 2 months, a new pattern emerged, not much different from the previous one. Charity continued 3 days a week, meditation once. I noticed that Thunderchild's name was being mentioned less and less often, which indicated that Lisa was no longer relying on her. This was a good thing. Despite her promises, Lisa never volunteered to educate me about her counselor's alternative plan and refused to be drawn when asked. We continued to meet every other week. Lisa continued to travel to her mother's house every other week, usually on Wednesdays. Another new aspect of my life was my involvement with the local men's shed. This was a club of sorts that approached my company as a possible sponsor. After realizing that men likely have a much smaller or non-existent support network from other men than women have from other women, men's sheds came about. It was a sort of social club where men could pursue common interests or simply share a worldview. Of course, there were too many divorcees among them, but that was a good thing. The first few visits opened my eyes as I saw men supporting each other emotionally as women traditionally did. I made some good friends there and tried to go once a week, usually on Fridays and on Lisa's mother's evenings. 2 months into the new deal, I was increasingly suspicious that Lisa was refusing to tell me about the substitute for her trip outside the house to get to know herself. It must be a pretty grand thing if it even took me 2 months to finalize it. The frequency of our sex didn't change. However, after a brief increase in quality, it returned to its new, meager norm. As an experiment, I declined her requests a couple times on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She was still very horny. Strange. Seeing no end to my insidious doubts, I made one phone call one Wednesday to move our relationship forward. I met Lisa at the door at 9:17 p.m. that same Wednesday night. Mother-in-law's night. As she took off her coat, I inquired about her mother's health. Lisa replied that she was fine and began listing the old lady's current complaints. This continued until she followed me into the kitchen for the proffered cup of hot chocolate. There she came face to face with her mother. The latter came to her senses rather quickly from the realization that I had tricked her. Lisa turned pale and then threw up in the sink. After her mother said a few words to her on the subject of honesty and integrity, she jumped out. The modern man, like a caring host, walked her to the door. When he returned, he went in search of his wife. While I was upstairs, I heard Lisa's car start and pull out of our circular driveway. The bitch even left the back door open when she was in a hurry. The next day when I left for work, she was still missing and not answering her cell phone. I found out over the phone that she hadn't contacted her mother. I spent some of my precious time reflecting on my long-standing commitment to mate for life and to never knowingly throw my mate out of the nest. I came to the conclusion that nothing should change, no matter how odious the circumstances became. It was with a heavy heart that I returned home that Thursday night. Not surprisingly, Lisa was not there. Very surprisingly, she called shortly before 7 p.m., but after making sure I was home, she left. I don't remember if I was surprised or not when I heard her car in the driveway 15 minutes later. The modern man walked to the door and saw through the small window that a second car had pulled up behind his car in the driveway. Lisa had already gotten out of her car by then and walked over to the second car. A slender man about our age, 5 feet 10 inches tall, stepped out of the car and looked around the house. They held hands and he leaned over to kiss my wife briefly on the lips. I'll be the first to admit that I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, but you didn't have to be Einstein to realize that I was seeing the opening gambit of the public aspect of Plan B. Perhaps it was nervousness that had Lisa shifting from foot to foot. That usually meant she desperately needed to go to the bathroom. Perhaps one thing triggered the other. Before they could take 2 steps toward the house, I was already standing in front of the door. Lisa and her friend froze. I saw him squeeze her hand for courage. Her words will remain in my soul for decades to come. David, this is Michael, the other man I love. I'm sorry you two met like this, but after what happened last night, you forced our hand. I just wanted to bring him here to show you that he's a good guy and not a threat to you. I almost laughed at that last bit of information. It was obvious to blind Freddy that slender 5'7" Mick was no threat to muscular Dave. Mick didn't make eye contact with me, but threw a look at Lisa as if to say, I thought you said your husband worked in an office. I guess he was either uninformed about my physical characteristics or they were misrepresented. At this point, my hunch proved correct as Lisa walked past me through the door and headed for the restroom, with Michael following her. The modern man followed Lisa through the door. The caveman stepped forward and punched Michael in the solar plexus with a meaty fist. The caveman smirked as his opponent was lifted to his feet and thrown on his ass. He then watched as Michael literally crawled to his car, got in and drove off. Not bad for a guy who couldn't catch his breath for another half a minute. I was still staring at the departing admirer when Lisa returned. She followed my gaze with a puzzled expression. Where's Michael going? He decided not to stick around. You didn't hurt him, did you? I told you he wasn't a threat. Have you asked yourself if I'm a threat to him? Why would I do that? I didn't think so. I guess he didn't think so either. Lisa grabbed her cell phone absent-mindedly. A very unfashionable man snatched it from her, wedged it between the bricks of the house and the concrete walkway around the house. Then with one blow, smashed it for good. Lisa stared at the phone, then at me like I was an alien. But I love him. I just want to make sure he's okay. And you don't see anything wrong with that statement, do you, wife? But Thunderchild said it was all right. Come on in, Lisa. Sounds like you're starting from half a finished script. This brilliant sarcasm did not please Lisa at all. She smiled at me, as if in sincere gratitude. I led her into the living room. When she sat down next to me on the couch, I moved defiantly to one of the chairs across from her. I gave her as much time as she needed to gather her thoughts. After all, I was the one who'd rudely disrupted her plan. Dave, it all started when I first came to Thunderchild. I'm sorry to interrupt, Lisa. I know I should have asked this months ago, but is she really a qualified counselor? Almost, Dave. She's in her second year of social work school. Not qualified then, but that didn't stop you from dating her, did it? You've never met her, Dave. She's so wise, so alive. She got to the bottom of our problem, and I knew she was the right choice. And what is the crux of our problem, Lisa? In Thunderchild's humble opinion? She told me that my self-esteem issues stem from the fact that you take me for granted, Dave. You treat me like property rather than an equal member of our marital team. In short, you're repressing me. She said that our partnership is unbalanced, and not just because, I hate to say this, Dave, because I'm out of your league. She said I just need to do something to get you out of your, as she put it correctly, relationship lethargy. Far from it, but I'm proud of myself for not exploding at that moment. You know how cartoon characters' eyes bulge in surprise? That's exactly how my brain felt. The depth of Lisa's self-deception was staggering. And then I remembered her habit of inflating herself and her actions while deflating everything I did. Where to start? What exactly did I do to displease you, Lisa? Well, Dad was a doctor, and you? Well, you're just a salesman. But I don't want to dwell on that, Dave. It's not your fault you didn't have the opportunities Dad had. Anyway, I figured the best way to shock you was to pretend to have a lover and then sort of let you find out about him. That way you'd appreciate what you had in me. Then I would agree to give him up in exchange for you treating me as an equal, giving me the respect due a daughter of the moon goddess. You're probably wondering why I didn't die laughing at that statement. It was what a group of her psychotic friends believed. It seemed to be a mixture of Buddhism and paganism. Up until now, I thought it was harmless. I guess I screwed up. Looking back, I realized I was too stunned to respond. But at some point, it all went downhill. I met Michael, and he turned out to be really nice. He's better than you. He works in an office, a supervisor. Lisa glowed with pride. His hands are always soft and clean. Sorry, I'm digressing. Anyway, we started dating, and I started having feelings for him. It wasn't part of the plan, and I didn't know what to do. I stopped seeing him for a week to think about it. Then I realized it was time for me to rub your nose in it so you'd start fighting for me. But when it came down to it, I couldn't do it. Call me a coward if you want, but after loving you for so many years, I realized I just couldn't do it, couldn't hurt you like that. In that week away from Michael, I realized that I love him. I know he loves me. He can't tear himself away from me. It's like what it was like between us 10 years ago before you settled down. At that moment, I was too shocked to speak. I had only experienced a feeling like that once before. I was fighting a bushfire. It was early evening, when fires usually slow down due to increased humidity. The fire was slowly rolling down the hill against the wind. Myself and a few other volunteers were leisurely building a backfire on a slumber strip about 1 kilometer from the base of the hill. We were in no hurry as we knew we had a few hours. The fire reached the base of the hill and just burst into flames. Against the wind and growing humidity, it traveled the kilometer between the hill and me in about 2 minutes. It was so huge and so strong that I instinctively realized that running was a waste of time. Either I would die or our fire break would stop him. At the risk of stating the obvious, I did the latter. The fact is, the feeling of terror and admiration I felt then was the same as it is now. That's when I suggested we break up to sort out my feelings for Michael. When you wouldn't let me go willingly, I realized I couldn't leave without telling you the real reason. I loved you too much, Dave, and I couldn't hurt you. So I went back to sneaking around behind your back. That way I could explore my feelings for Michael without hurting you. How do you spell delusional logic? I could see that Lisa was really confused. Well, she's not dumb and subconsciously should realize that this is utter nonsense. Time to do some fact-finding. So, Lisa, I assume you wanted to sleep with him, but you couldn't get around your old-fashioned values of not sleeping with someone you don't love. Maybe that's why you fell in love with him? Perhaps because I seemed to be taking the conversation seriously, Lisa paused to consider it. At that moment, I realized that she wasn't fully aware of her feelings. She also confirmed that she had slept with him and felt no guilt about it. Weird. But things got even weirder. Lisa suddenly smiled. Maybe, Dave. But I've done well, haven't I? I've been sleeping with him for 2.5 months and you haven't guessed a thing. I've made sure you don't notice any differences. Tell me you saw any difference in my behavior, any difference in my love for you. Has our love changed in any way? No, because I love you now as I always have. Michael is not a part of us, he sits outside of us. I also want you to know that he doesn't get anything that you don't get. You and I have sex 3 times a week, just like Michael and I do. You and I see each other every other week, just like Michael and I do. So you found out about Michael and me. Nothing has to change. I promise you'll never see the difference. I finally found my voice. I decided to burst a few logic bubbles. Lisa, looking back, I can see the differences. I didn't at the time because I trusted you and thought we were equally committed to fidelity. Wasn't that foolish of me? I assume you met with Michael on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. That's when you try to look your best. I haven't noticed any difference in your movements since you don't work, and I'm on the road all day making a living on my own. As for our sex life, I've noticed an increase in quantity but a decrease in quality, like you're just repeating moves. I just thought it was part of your treatment. The treatment you refused to discuss with me. I paused to see if that got through to her. I noticed how she flinched when I used the words trust and loyalty, and when I pointed out that she was using her slacker behavior to deceive me. When she stopped volunteering, I decided to explore the boundaries of her delusions. So you're asking me if you can keep the current agreement? It spared her any feelings of shame or guilt. I knew they were there. Even without her facial expressions, I knew that no amount of self-deception could completely hide deeply buried feelings. No, I'm not asking, Dave. It's important for me to assert myself so you stop dominating me. So where does that leave us? Are you going to leave me and go with Michael? Yep. I don't know, Dave. You, interrupted my plans before I fully disclosed my feelings for Michael. He treats me better than you do, but I'm old enough to realize that's probably only because our love is new and fresh. He has plenty of money to spoil me, while we always seem to be having difficulties. I'm confused. I love you both, but this is different somehow. I just don't know, Dave. I knew the money thing was true, but I wasn't going to share the reasons why. I paid for a 4-bedroom house. Bought it with a family in mind years ago. Shithead lived in a 2-bedroom apartment. Oh yeah, I did some checking, got his license plate number. The other reason was that I had invested all our spare money in a business. A business that I'd been slowly taking out of Lisa's control ever since I discovered the car belonged to Michael Smith, and then convinced myself that Michael and Thunderchild were 2 different people. I needed more time. This eagle was once an Eagle Scout. The Scout's motto has always been, be prepared. I really regretted letting my trust in Lisa dominate my actions over the last 2 months. I still couldn't believe how much her fundamental beliefs had changed. I also regretted that the time I should have been spending on the business at this critical moment had prevented me from spying on Lisa during her charity days. There must be some factor I was missing. Where does that leave me, Lisa, or should I say us? Well, I talked to Michael last night and he made a valid argument. It's not fair that you live with me and get me almost entirely, while he only gets me part of 3 days a week. Oh yes. I was wondering how come he works in an office and yet sees you during the day. He starts work at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and toils until 11 o'clock. Every other Wednesday, he has every other Wednesday off. Like I said, Michael thinks it's unfair that he sees me so infrequently. He wants to take me on vacation. He has an RV, so it should be fun. We were going to go when I suggested the separation, but you ruined it. Now that you know about him, I think it's only fair that I spend more time with him. I'm sorry I ruined your holiday with your boyfriend, wife. Once again, that sarcastic sarcasm was completely off the top of her head. I'm going to have to do a little research on hallucinations. They were mind-boggling in scope. I had to do something to shake her up. You have no idea how much you've hurt me with your betrayal, do you? How much damage you've done? Oh no, you can't blame this on me. If you'd just gone along with our idea of breaking up and stayed out of my business, we wouldn't be talking right now and you wouldn't be hurt. The logic is there, of course, but damn it! God, there had to be some way to overcome her defenses. Guilt was clearly not helping. It didn't matter, of course. Her fate had already been sealed half an hour ago. The puzzlement was interrupted when she went to the bathroom again. I started again when she returned. So, you're going on a love vacation with Michael, and then what? Well, I'm not naive enough to think that after a 2-week vacation, I'll be sure which path I'll take. I'll have to see how I feel. I'll either stay with him for a few more weeks or come back here. When I come back, I promise you will show me how much you love me. I assure you, I will make my decision with an open heart. You'll see that nothing will change. How long do you plan to keep this up, Lisa? Only until I make up my mind, Dave. I'm not stupid enough to count on both of you being with me for the long haul. I really don't know how long it will take, but rest assured, as soon as I make a decision, I'll let one of you know. Please don't demand a time commitment from me. This is too important for that. This time I went to the bathroom. Maybe a splash of cold water would rouse me from my dream. That couldn't really happen, could it? One of the things that confused me, there were only about 1,000 of them, was how her counselor fit into all of this. I sat back down, continuing to dream sadly. What bothers me, Lisa, is that if your counselor recommended you do selfless charity work and you dated Michael instead, how are you going to recover? I mean, why go to a counselor and then ignore what she said? And finally, signs of shame. Lisa broke eye contact for a long pause. Dave, she didn't recommend me to do charity work. The whole fake affair thing was her idea. I was a little worried when I found Michael and actually fell in love with him. But I consulted Thunderchild and she said it was okay. What's more, she said it was for the best. She said it would be much more convincing that way. Honestly, it was hard for me to justify sleeping with him, but she said it was okay. It wasn't cheating because it was on doctor's orders. Lisa smiled at the memory of their past joke together. I sat there opening and closing my mouth like a goldfish. How do you get through to someone who justifies anything by saying it's okay because a semi-educated hippie bitch said it was okay? How do you get rid of that smug smile? Lisa, how would you react if I pulled a stunt like this on you? Would I come home and tell you that I'd met another woman and wanted to spend some time with her to see if I loved her more than I loved you? The smile grew even wider. Yeah, Thunderchild said you'd ask about it. She calls you my caveman, you know that? But look at you, Dave. You're an electrician. You're lucky you got me. You'll never meet anyone who could love you as much as I do. To answer your question, I hope that if the situation were reversed, I would be big enough to understand your dilemma. It would only encourage me to fight harder. Her face softened dramatically. Look, Dave, I don't want you to think I don't feel your pain. I can imagine what you're going through. I'm just sorry you made it necessary. She stood up as if about to leave. I desperately wanted to hurt her a little before she did. Besides, I'm basically an honest guy. Before you go, Lisa, I want you to know that the deal I told you about when you tried to leave last time is still in effect. If you leave the gate, it's over. I'll consider it a request for a divorce. There's no going back. Lisa smiled again. Thunderchild said you'd try to bluff too, Dave. Just look at it from my point of view. The worst that could happen is that I end up with Michael. Richer and happier. You can't bluff without cards, Dave. This bitch knew I was bluffing, but completely misrepresented the reason why. My company accountant said I needed at least another month to transfer ownership of the company. So I took a desperate step. Listen, Lisa. No matter what happens, I will feel responsible for you until you marry someone else worthy. Especially since I know now that you're a lot sicker than I realized. That responsibility includes protecting you from a man who is so lowly that he would steal a married woman away from her husband. A coward who will walk away and let the love of his life stand alone against her enraged husband. I finally realized that I had gotten through to her. Deep down, she remembered her old values. I don't know how deep her deep shame was buried, but I knew it was still there. Overjoyed at the prospect of returning the pain, I said more than I should have. It risked ruining my newly hatched plan, but after all, I'm only human. If you think I'm going to sit here like a statue and wait for you to toss me some scraps, you're wrong. Just like I'm not going to let you and that wife-stealing, scum-sucking clam ride off happily into the sunset. Though perhaps you deserve each other. An immoral onanist and a whore who broke her marriage vows. Yes, modern man is dead. The caveman became the supreme ruler. I watched as the pain seeped into her soul. Then I watched the filters in her head do their evil work. The smile returned. You're bluffing again, David. Keep the lights on. I'll be back in 2 weeks, a month tops. She turned away toward the front door. The conversation was over. The ultimatum was set. As she walked out the door, she saw the remains of her cell phone. I'll call you and give you my new phone number. Don't worry, I won't need it. She looked embarrassed. Why, Dave? If you don't have my number, how can you call me before I get back? I'll never call you again. Stick your number where the sun don't shine. I saw the filters working again and the smile returned. Look, Dave, I'm really sorry I had to do it this way. I know I hurt you, and I would have given anything to avoid it. But I think we're both better off now that I don't have to hide behind your back. I hated that you made me do that. It really stressed me out and made it hard for me to relax around you. If you love me as much as I love you, we'll be fine. I'll see you soon. No, goodbye, Lisa. Call me before you come over next time. We have an open marriage now, and I might be entertaining a lady if you know what I mean. She stopped. What's an open marriage, Dave? You know, Lisa, it's when a married couple sleeps with other people outside of marriage. Lisa reacted instinctively. She turned around and took 2 steps in my direction. Then she stopped and the smile returned. She realized it was a cheap tactic to get her to contradict what she had said earlier. Still smiling, she headed to her car and drove off. I wondered when she would find out that I had taken all the bank cards out of her wallet. I also took off her rings before she went to her mom's yesterday. If her lover was going to mess around with her for the next month, he could pay her bills. I went back inside to call my accountant. There had to be a way to expedite the legal process of selling the company. In the evening, Lisa's mother called to get the latest news. I told the simple truth. Not because I vindictively wanted to hurt Lisa more, but simply because even cavemen are honest guys. Plus, we'd always consulted about Lisa's problems. From her deteriorating mental health to the fact that we were forcing her to find a counselor. Her mom suggested, whatever happens to us as a couple, we need to take steps to get Tandasild out of Lisa's life. I couldn't agree more. The last thing her mom had told me was that no matter what happened, she would be there for her. I read between the lines. She understood that her daughter had crossed the line. She was clearing my conscience. That night, Mr. Michael Smith was attacked in his driveway and had his wallet stolen. When the police visited him in the hospital, he described the attacker as a man over 6 feet tall and wearing a ski mask. Surprisingly, the police never came to see me. Apparently, it's a rough neighborhood. What a waste of an alibi, rewiring a man's shed in front of 2 recon witnesses. I watched his apartment the next day when Lisa brought him home from the hospital. He was slouching a little. It was broken ribs. He also walked like an old cowboy. Swollen testicles do that to a guy. The next day, I called a locksmith because when I got home, I found many of Lisa's belongings missing. She had also left her new phone number. I wrote it down in my cell phone so I would know which calls to ignore. 2 weeks later, I watched Lisa and him load the caravan parked in the driveway, already attached to his car. This activity dragged on late into the night, under the blinding light of the newly installed security lights. The next evening, I drove by the apartment and saw a strange sight. A car with its nose pointed skyward and a broken windshield over the steering wheel. The rear axle of the car, along with the wheels, was a meter behind the trunk. Behind them was an RV lying on its side. An experienced forensic scientist would have solved this mystery quickly. The driver, who had started the engine to pull the heavy caravan into the driveway, staggered back as the chain securing the car's rear axle to the tree reached its limit. The sudden jolt dislocated the rear cart, and by Newton's first law of motion, the driver's head hit the windshield. Mick should have been wearing his seatbelt. The jolt from the suddenly taut chain under the caravan wheel flipped him onto his side. Bloody kids and their antics. On another occasion. 2 more nights and I'll be completely rewiring the men's shed. Neither the happy couple nor the police have so far connected me to these 2 incidents. Gudo. Lisa left 2 messages on my phone. She reminded me that she loved me and inquired about my health. I bought a fancy new phone and happily reprogrammed it. Most calls were forwarded to my old number. Calls from Lisa were forwarded to the player's anonymous number. I decided this was appropriate since she was embarking on the biggest adventure of her life. When Michael got home the night after the incident, his head was bandaged and he was starting to slump again. Hitting the steering wheel with his ribs healing like that must have been very painful. I'm sure that even though he enjoyed my wife's company, he didn't enjoy her bedroom skills. I asked around my guys to see which of them had broken ribs in the past. The one I found explained that it took a good month before he could do anything resembling normal activity. So 4 weeks after the first beating, Michael was attacked again. Coincidentally, again a 6-footer, but wearing a different ski mask. He was again beaten and covered in bruises, especially in the groin area. In addition, his wallet was stolen again. This time I was visited by the local police. So was a member of the men's barn whose house I was installing new light fixtures in at the time of the incident. It's amazing how the men's shed bylaws work. Men support each other in times of need. As far as I've been able to find out, Michael has been in the hospital for 3 days. It's hard to tell he hadn't changed cars yet. Whether he wasn't insured or they hadn't honored his claim, I just didn't know. It doesn't matter. The messages from Lisa to my landline were becoming more frequent and more depressing. I guess she was lonely in that apartment, but not desperate enough to realize how seriously I was bluffing. She was a confident little liar. I had to hand it to her. I was a little surprised she hadn't come for sex. I guess it had been a long time coming for her. Sometimes I would watch Michael work at 11 p.m. just for a laugh. It was comical to watch him open a window on the second floor and carefully scan the parking lot for a good 5 minutes before deciding to walk out. Heck, I guess that makes me a terrorist. This observation also allowed me to notice another pattern that will come in handy in the future. 2 weeks later, I finally got the call from the accountant I had been waiting for. I didn't own my company anymore. Some guy in the Cayman Islands did. I hoped to meet him someday. He was in high demand thanks to that big government contract I'd gotten a couple months ago. I was back to being a lowly electrician. I guess Lisa was right. I'll always be a salesman. It was time to put an end to this charade. That same night, I spotted Michael's office. A little after 10 p.m., one of the cleaning ladies came out the side door to dump a few bags of trash in the dumpster. I snuck through the ajar door and hid behind the receptionist's desk. There were no cameras there that I could see. I grabbed the phone book from the receptionist's desk. There he was, Mr. Michael Smith. Hell, he was a supervisor, a construction supervisor. That's like a janitor, isn't it? I guess he worked nights doing maintenance and supervising the janitors. I was confused. If it was a tradesman, then who was I? My first hunch to look in the basement paid off. There was only one lighted room, and it revealed a slumbering Michael Smith. His feet were on the table. I patted him on the shoulder, and he jumped to his feet like he was at Cape Canaveral. I was going to give him another whipping, but he looked so pathetic that I just didn't have the guts. He stared at my face, expression of horror blooming like a flower in a sped-up nature movie. He voluntarily backed himself into a corner. My hands on his lapels helped. He didn't say anything, so I did. Hello, Michael? Aren't you going to greet an old friend? He seized on one of my words. A friend? Yes, of course. After all, this is the 4th time we've met. The realization of my meaning flashed across his face. I hadn't realized there was an expression other than horror. Relax, Mikey. Nothing will happen unless you answer my next 4 questions wrong. Got it? Nod. Are you going to report this encounter to the police? Shake. Are you going to tell Lisa about this meeting? Shake. Are you going to entertain another man's wife as long as you live? Shake. Do you realize what will happen if you violate this agreement? A very energetic nod. This concludes our meeting. Have a happy and peaceful life. After completing this community service and smelling the odor of urine in my nose, like a caveman, I cautiously crawled outside the same way I came in. I'm happy to say that I have no idea when Lisa was evicted from Michael's safe apartment. Either it was that night, and she'd gone to her mother's, or he'd been generous enough to take her in for the night. I figured she never found out that I'd changed the locks. Surely that would have triggered a disturbing phone call at some point. Speaking of phone calls, I heard nothing that night or the next day. With no leads, I decided to guess when she would show up. Lucky me. It was after 9 o'clock in the evening when I heard a scraping sound, like trying to insert a key that no longer fits into a door lock. Almost a minute later, the doorbell rang. I opened it in my robe. Lisa was there, of course. I don't know how I expected to see her, but it probably wasn't the well-dressed makeup on, but slightly alarmed look with which I was greeted. When she stepped toward me to kiss me, I carefully stepped aside and removed her coat. I invited her in as a guest, and we sat down at the kitchen table. She only had one way to play it off, and I wasn't disappointed. So, Lisa, what can I do for you? Intentionally phrasing this question as I would phrase it for a guest or client was, by and large, intentional. However, the effort was wasted. I've got good news, Dave. I've made a decision and you're going to love it. She paused to watch the look of anticipation on my face. I'm sorry, I'm not that good of an actor. I continued to look at her sadly. She seemed unfazed and continued. I was right about new love. When the novelty of being in a relationship with Michael wore off, I realized I didn't love him the way I love you. Besides, I don't think he was really as well off as he led me to believe. After a few weeks, he stopped spoiling me like he used to and asked me to cut back on my spending. On top of that, he started having health problems. I stopped having sex with him 6 weeks ago, if that makes you feel better. Now I've had time to open up, put it all out of my mind, and realize I want to get back with you. Isn't that good news? Yeah, that's exactly what I thought. He finally kicked you out? I don't know what you mean, Dave. I made my decision last night and told him it was over between us. It was too late to come here, so I went to my mom's. When did you learn that lying is so easy, Lisa? He kicked you out last night, and thank God. Sitting up and rubbing my knuckles, I watched the realization dawn on Lisa's face. 3 beatings, 1 car accident, and a sudden change in his commitment all took time. Well, I'm back now, David, so we can get back to where we were before. I laughed out loud. About 10 seconds later, Fiona came out of our bedroom. I will describe her for you. Fiona is only 22 years old. She has a slender body and her face is much better than plain. Even without makeup, she made Lisa look bad. Fiona said hi there as she walked by, took a glass from the cupboard, filled it with milk, and walked out again. As she walked past, she gave me a peck on the cheek. Lisa didn't say anything, but gave me the best goldfish act I'd ever seen. I'm sorry, Lisa, but I suggested you call before coming here. I didn't want you to find out like this, but it's not my fault you came unannounced. Look on the bright side. At least now we don't have to sneak around behind your back. This has been going on for a while now. Finally, Lisa regained her speech. Do you have a girlfriend? Yes, Lisa. When you left, I was really depressed. I started drinking. I met a guy called Bluey in the pub, and he said I had self-esteem issues. He had once done an adult woodworking course, so he seemed like he could offer advice. He assured me that he had learned something from all 3 of his ex-wives. Anyway, after I told him that I had been rejected by a girl out of my league, he said I needed to socialize with a wide variety of girls to figure out exactly what was in my league. Fiona is the 3rd one I've tried socializing with. I know she's a little old, maybe a little plain and chubby, but she seems happy to socialize with this simple tradesman. Her father was just a boiler man. I paused so that Lisa could mentally compare my age, appearance, and figure to the enchanting vision that now lay in her bed. However, that was all the time I had given her. Yeah, she works, cooks, seems to like sex more than 3 times a week, and is pretty loud when we do it. And she doesn't treat me like a burden who not only brings in all the income, but has to do her share of the housework and vegetable garden. I love her already, but it's a very different love than ours, fresher and brighter. I am old enough to realize that perhaps it is simply because our love is newer, less stale. Judging by Lisa's face, her blood pressure had reached dangerous levels. I didn't want to fall in love with her, but I consulted with Bluey and he said it was okay. My ego will still be restored. My love for Fiona shouldn't change what you and I have. After all, I've been sleeping with her for 4 weeks now, and you can't say you've noticed any difference in my attitude toward you, can you? I have no idea how much irony there was in it, but I felt it was all necessary for my plan to succeed. I paused to see how she took it. Apparently not very well. I totally agree with Bluey's advice. Well, I can say that with relief. I wouldn't want to hurt you, you know that, but I haven't had time to fully explore my feelings for Fiona yet. Decide which one of you I love more. I'm not naive enough to think that after such a short period of time, I'll be sure which path I'll choose. We'll have to see. I promise to let you know my decision as soon as I make it. If you leave again, you'll see that nothing will change. I'm not foolish enough to expect you both to be with me for long. Please don't demand some sort of time frame from me. This is too important for that. Confirmation that not all my words reached Lisa's consciousness was her next statement. You can't expect me to live here without this troll. You're my husband, Dave. Your wife is already back, so she'll have to go. Ah, yes. Bluey warned me that you might go for that line. He said that if you do, I should exercise self-control. I know it is unwise to ask you both to share the house, so if you return to your mother, I will let you know when I have made my decision." At this point, I took advantage of her utter bewilderment, lifted her to her feet, and led her to the door. Standing on the threshold and handing her my purse and coat, I whispered in her ear, "Can you feel my pain yet?" As I slammed the door shut, I didn't hear her car pull away for another 10 minutes. I was totally unprepared for what I discovered when I returned home the next evening. Lisa was cooking dinner, with a bill from the locksmith and a new key on the table and a court order next to her insisting that she had every right to stay in the marital home. How was I to know that one of her meditation group was a lawyer? It was obvious from the few words we exchanged that Lisa's confidence had returned. Oh crap. While she continued to cook, I moved her things from my bedroom to the spare bedroom and then packed an overnight bag and left without a word. I had a couch and a shower at work so I could hide there indefinitely. I ignored all phone calls. I decided to go home the next night after dinner. Lisa was watching television. She tried to hug me from behind while I was making a cup of tea, but I pulled away. She asked where her rings were, and I told her that this merchant had to sell them to make ends meet. She was shocked by this, opened her mouth to say something, but changed her mind and went back to the TV. I was a little surprised that she was still in the spare room. For once, I didn't know her plan of action. Unless, of course, she had one. In the middle of the night, I felt her sliding naked across my bed. I told her unequivocally that she should know that I am a faithful soul. I would never cheat on Fiona. She left, sobbing quietly. On Friday, she came home from meditation and found me cuddled up on the couch with Fiona. She stared at her intently until Fiona was completely uncomfortable. We just got up and went to the bedroom. The next morning, Fiona had another parade of tank tops while she made us breakfast in bed. She just ignored Lisa. That set the course of action for the next 2 weeks. I was either not at home or I was there with Fiona. I hardly spoke to Lisa at all. I still did my shopping, but I became very curious about what Lisa was using as money. I solved that problem when I looked in her purse one day. She still had copies of Michael's bank cards. The stupid jerk must have forgotten to cancel them. He was in for a surprise when he got the next statement. 2 weeks later, I was leaving for work when Lisa asked me to come home in the evening so we could talk. I returned with Fiona, much to Lisa's dismay. Numerous attempts to persuade her to leave had failed. But she began her prepared speech anyway. "Dave, that's not fair. When I left for Michael, I told you I would come back and give you the opportunity to propose to me. Now you've turned things around, but you won't let me do the same to you. How can I if her isn't here all the time?" "I'm sorry, Lisa, but those were your rules, not mine." "Well, time to decide. It's either me or this." She tossed the divorce petition on the table. I flipped through it. Blank, unsigned. "Bluey warned me you'd try to bluff." "It's definitely not a bluff." "How can I prove it?" "By signing it." With a determined look, but with some hesitation, Lisa took the pen and signed. Once again, the conversation did not go as she had imagined. After signing, she dropped the pen and stared at me. I couldn't believe my luck. "I still think you're bluffing, Lisa. Can I get this straight? You haven't worked in 3 years, forcing me to be the sole breadwinner, even refusing to help with the business. You do all the housework, shopping, and yard work. We ate takeout every other night because you didn't have time to cook. The only time you cared about your appearance was when you were dating your boyfriend. You let yourself relax, and honestly, you disappointed me a little in bed. You lied to me outright and without concealment, not to mention having fun with another guy behind my back. In doing so, you proved yourself completely unworthy of my trust and respect. But worst of all, you've condemned me to a childless future. And you still think you can dictate terms?" I'd be lying if I said I hadn't enjoyed Lisa's embarrassment so far, but that last statement gave me no pleasure. I watched each of my truths crash into Lisa's mind. She watched nauseously as I signed the papers, then handed them to Fiona so she could witness both autographs. When she was done, I folded them up and tucked them into my pocket. Lisa just followed the papers with her eyes. "I call your bluff, Lisa. Too bad you thought I was bluffing when I told you our marriage was over if you went out the gate to your janitor. It was actually over the first time you slept with that little jerk. But Dave, you always said an eagle would never abandon its mate." "Yes, Lisa, but I never said I would prevent a fellow eagle from leaving him." Once again, the goldfish dominated for a few minutes. Then, "If you knew our marriage was over when I left, why did you ruin my relationship with Michael?" It got so bad that he was afraid to leave the house at night. It was the guy's doing, Lisa. He stole something that belonged to me, and I couldn't rest until he paid for it. Besides, I took what I said that time seriously. Until we are finally divorced, I will feel responsible for you. I couldn't let you have a relationship with that little shit. The last spark of defiance flashed in Lisa's eyes. I can go back to him. I'm sure he'll take me back and take care of me. I simply put the fingers of both hands together and bent them backwards. They cracked spectacularly. Ready when you are, Lisa. Lisa did pretty much the only thing she had left to do. She flew away. Epilogue. The following Friday night, Lisa's mom arrived. I invited her into the house. She showed no hostility toward me, which I understood to be a statement of understanding on her part. She expressed surprise that my girlfriend was not home and asked where she was. I looked at my watch and said that at this time of day she was probably at a restaurant on the tropical island where she lived. When she raised an eyebrow questioningly, I explained that in appreciation for her services, I had arranged for her and her fiancé to take a week's vacation at the company's expense. They both had a very understanding boss, some guy who owned an electrical contracting business. I also expressed my pleasure that since she was gone, I could sleep in my own bed again instead of on a mattress on the floor. I swear I saw the admiration in her eyes. Then we got down to business. She was here to negotiate a divorce. My generous offer to split all of our assets, except for the company, 50/50ths, made it quick and easy to settle. She never tried to get a piece of the business knowing that her daughter had not put a penny or a finger on it. We parted as friends. I returned Lisa's cards to her and explained that she could use them for reasonable expenses until the divorce was finalized. I didn't bother explaining that the limits had been drastically reduced. I'm not stupid. That was 14 days ago. I had been on duty near meditation last Friday, and then I walked down a short and wide student path to a lonely old house. The old shabby bomb had a personalized T-Child license plate on it. Tonight I was walking back to my car, having just replaced the matching fuse wire with one that was clearly too big. Then, after a bit of braking and entering, I sabotaged the light switch right in front of the front door, as only a humble electrician can do. Let's just say that Thunderchild was about to get struck by lightning. If it didn't work, I was ready to rename my axe handle Lightning. I think after 6 or 8 episodes of it being hurled across the room by 240 volts or exploding electrical appliances, it would be ready. Then we could have a chat about how wise it is to give advice without being qualified. The end. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.